What up, y'all? It's the boss himself, Devin the Don from Mtg. We like it a Halo. And today, more new Capenna previews. And another day where we have just as many commons and uncommons that I want to single out as we had like rares and mythics all day. So far, commons and uncommons have been some of the absolute best cards in the set. And that is not what we normally see from Magic sets. But we have been seeing it lately from Kamigawa and now from new Capenna. And just like 2/4 a dime and 9 pennies, that is some nice change. I'll start the day with that lower rarity stuff as usual, and we'll begin with a reprint alert as usual lately. It's Disdainful Stroke. This card is reprinted again for the, 10th, 12th time into Standard. We already had it in Standard for the last few years, and we're going to continue having it in Standard for the next few years, I would imagine. It's about right for Standard power level. I can see why they keep reprinting it over and over, and it's a very good card. Shows up in a lot of decks. Even in the main deck, it turns out, and it's probably better than a lot of the cards that we'll look at today. So, just one in a blue for instant speed, counter-target thing with mana value 4 or greater. You're going to see it for the next, 30 years. So just get used to it is all I'm saying, if you haven't already. But let's move on to a brand new card, everybody. Here's Celestial Regulator. This is 3 mana. 1 blue and a white for a 2/3 Angel Advisor with a flying, and when it ETBs, you choose target creature you don't control and you tap that creature. If you control a creature with a counter on it, the chosen creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So probably just a limited playable thing. It's a little bit better than a Windrake, a 2 mana or 3 mana 2/3 with flying. Not bad already. Decent enter the battlefield trigger in your tempo decks, and tapping a creature down and freezing it is again okay. So just a fine limited creature and probably one of the better strictly limited things that we'll look at today. There was also some more citizen support in draft that we saw today, and I want to take a look at that. So let's look first at Civil Servant and also Darling of the Masses. Eventually, Civil Servant is just 2 mana, a green and a white for a 2/3 cat citizen. And whenever it attacks, you may tap another untapped citizen you control. If you do, Civil Servant gets +1/+0 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Not bad at all. And Darling of the Masses also looks pretty tempting. This is 4 mana, 2 a green and a white for a 2/4 elf citizen. Other citizens you control get +1/+0. Whenever Darling of the Masses attacks, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. So both pretty cool looking little uncommons for the citizen draft archetype, but I think they're just half of a peg too low in terms of power level for standard play. Deep down, I will always give a 2 mana 3/3 cat a chance in my own heart, but I don't want to mislead you. I don't know that this card is as good as it might look to some people. So let's move on to Glittering Stockpile here. I think this is actually really neat. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a treasure. It's an artifact. Now you can tap it and add a red to put a stash counter on Stockpile. You can also tap it and sack it to add X mana of any color, where X is the number of stash counters on Glittering Stockpile. This is really cool, and I think that it's instantly better than a lot of the 3 mana rocks that are available to play in Standard, and those see play from time to time, especially like Celestis, right? But even outside of having a cool ability, option like the Celestis, and the fact that this costs red mana to play in the first place, a lot of the other rocks you don't have to actually pay, outside of colorless mana for them. So there is that to consider, but at the same time, this, after just a couple of turns of tapping, which, you'll tap it every turn, even if you don't use the mana. You might as well tap it for a stash counter. And then, just a couple of turns in, you blow your stash, and it's 2 treasure tokens, 3 treasure tokens is what it ends up paying you. And that's actually pretty good ramp. I mean, I know that it has to be in play a few turns to actually do that for you, but I really don't think that's too much to ask. I'm probably going to bring this card up again in this video a few times, but I've been wanting to bring up Dragon Spark Reactor for a few cards this spoiler season so far, and this is one of them. I mean, it takes a few turns, but if you just keep the board clean with sweepers and stuff like that, then eventually you can just cash in Stockpile for 5, 6 treasure tokens. When those come into play, you'll get a bunch of counters on your Dragon Spark Reactor and just finish the game that way. It could work, All I'm saying is that this is a 3 mana rock, which is kind of baseline okay in the first place, and you eventually trade it in for 3 treasure tokens, and that is also very good, I think, for mana fixing and ramping or just whatever. So I really like this little thing. If you cannot tell, I think that there may be a diamond in the rough here. Kind of reached for that pun, but I think we still made it. Let's look next at Raffine's Silencer. This, I think, might be better than it looks too, but I'm probably not as excited about it as I am Glittering Stockpile. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 1/1 human assassin. When it ETBs, it connives. And when it dies, target creature an opponent controls gets -X until end of turn, where X is Raffine's Silencer's power. This is really sweet. It's got an ETB trigger and a dies trigger. It costs a little bit of mana to get into play for the power toughness, right? 3 mana for a 1/1's not really where you want to be, but it could be 3 mana for a 2/2. You might get all the way up to Escaped Zombies. Hey, that's something, but one way or the other, it's 3 mana. It kind of draws a card when it comes into play, enables flashback and graveyard reanimation and stuff like that. And then also when it dies, it might like take something out with it. That's actually really sweet. It's pretty good, you know? And note too, that if it gets up to 2/2, for instance, then it can attack or block. And then if something like, you know, kills it in combat, then it can more likely take the creature out that killed it too. Like it can take a 4/4 out if it's a 2/2. So all of this is actually really sweet. This leads to a creature that like might be way better than it looks at first glance. Most creatures that have an ETB trigger and a dice trigger, even if they're small things, are worth looking at. And both of these things are actually pretty good things to be able to do in a game of Magic. So I'm probably way more excited about this than I have any right to be. I might sound nuts talking about the card now, but maybe a couple of weeks after it's been in the format, it'll shut some people up. Do you get this one, Silencer? I don't know. I'm really... Again, I'm trying to work in puns, and I actually think they're better than I'm giving them credit for, but let's move on. Next, to Nightclubber. This is the much better removal on a body thing. Nightclubber is 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 2/2 human warrior. When it ETBs, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. You can also, in case you needed more for this card to do, you can blitz it into play for the same mana value but a better casting cost, 2 and a black. If you cast the spell for its blitz cost, it gains haste, and when the creature dies, draw a card. You sack it at the beginning of the next end step. So really sweet no matter which mode you play it on here. If you don't happen to have the 2 black, just blitz it into play. And sometimes even if you have the 2 black, you'll blitz it into play just to draw the card at the end of your turn. That's also, or just when it dies to draw the card. So that's really sweet. There's a lot of cool things about this. There's a tons of like tokens decks in the format right now that you might be able to just crush with this like pre-combat, but it's also pretty good to play it post-combat, which is cool. If you blitz it into play and kill a few things, I think it's funny that you can then attack with it the same turn. And then if your opponent does still have like the thing to kill it in combat, you'll still draw a card when it dies. So there's just all kinds of good things about this, man. A sweeper that also draws a card. Kind of good, just kind of good. There's going to be decks where even if you don't care about the ETB trigger against control or something, you'll just like blitz it into play and draw the card at the end of turn or something, or just draw the card when it dies. So there's a lot of really cool things about this, especially in the exact format we find ourselves in now, where not only is Black-White Tokens one of the best decks in the format, but Naya Tokens is starting to look like a really strong deck all throughout previous season too. So like this might actually be a very important card, at least for sideboards, but possibly even for main decks in best of one, depending on what the environment looks like, but at least for boards. This is a very good Magic card. Can't wait to go clubbing. Like every time you play the card, you're going to have to go like, because you are clubbing. Let's move on to Jewel Thief. This thing is really cool. It's 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 3/3 cat rogue with vigilance and trample. And when it enters the battlefield, you create a treasure token. So how much can we juice a 3 mana 3/3? This is basically like roided out Prosperous Innkeeper kind of. Enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. But instead of being a 2 mana 1/1, why don't we make it a 3 mana 3/3 with 2 keyword abilities? It's really actually very sweet. I don't know though. I still don't know that this ends up seeing all of the standard play, but I think it probably does. Honestly, it's a serviceable body. The keyword abilities aren't not there. They're at least there. And Vigilance is always better than people want to give it any credit for. I like Vigilance as an ability. Trample also, if you have Anthem effects or just a way to increase this thing's PT, suddenly you get it to a 5/5/6/6. The Trample matters so much. And again, in this format with all these tokens, Trample matters. So I just think this thing is really, really sweet. It's about as far as you can go on a 3/3, or a 3 mana ETB create a treasure token thing. That's absolutely the best part of the card is the ramp. And honestly, if that's all you want to look at it as, is a 3 mana ramp guy that is kind of like the beefiest 3 mana ramp guy they've ever printed, like pretty good look. Honestly, this might be one of the better cards of the day in some ways. It wouldn't be surprising if this too were way better than it might look to some people. Just in terms of value and like what you're getting for the rate, yeah, solid card. Some people might want to call her Lupin the Turd, but she's my Sherlock Holmes. Anyway, let's move on to Patch Up here next. This I'm actually quite excited about. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a sorcery. Return up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's Call of the Death Dweller, but just like probably better than Call of the Death Dweller. I mean, yeah, the Death Touch counter mattered occasionally. The Menace mount, the counter mattered often less than the Death Touch counter, but still mattered occasionally. But at the same time, even without being able to put a couple of keyword abilities on your guys, I think it's way better to potentially get a 3rd body bag. Now, in that case, you're just getting 3 1-drops, but like that could be good. That could be quite good, especially in like a combo deck that needs specific 1-drops, right? But one way or the other, it's basically card advantage, right? A white divination out of the graveyard. You pay 3 mana, you probably get 2 guys back. And Call of the Death Dweller saw sparing enough play in these sort of aristocrats piles that it makes me think that this might see just about as much play if black, white, or red, white, or whatever aristocrats is like a thing. So just keep your eye on this card. Being able to just get back 2 things for 3 mana has been proven to be like good enough, depending on what else is in the format to fuel this. But on the rare occasion where you get 3 things back from your graveyard, 3 serrated scorpion equivalents or whatever, like this could actually be just one of the better cards in your aristocrats pile. So I really like this thing, and just because of like sort of the history we have to go by with cards like this, again, Call of the Death Dweller, it makes me quite excited to get my hands on this and try some stuff out. I mean, so far, Aristocrats has been lagging behind a lot of the other decks in the format, but with this, we'll see if it can patch up. Man, what am I, 8 for 8 today on these? Anyway, let's move on, I guess, to the last lower rarity card that I want to talk about today, and that is Big Score. So this is just a better unexpected windfall. I've tried to read it like a million times, unless I'm just the dumbest person in the world, and I can't tell the difference. This is just a better unexpected windfall, which has already seen a bunch of play. Big Score is 4 mana, same mana value, but easier to cast. 3 and a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card. Draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. So it's the same. It's better, right? It's the exact same text box as Windfall, but it's just easier to cast. That's good. It's just obviously a very good Magic card, right? That's why it's kind of taken the top slot in the commons and uncommons today. And why a lot of the rares we're about to look at are probably not as good as this card, all things considered. But yes, I guess you can play 4 of this and then 2 Unexpected Windfall if you wanted to. But I think most decks won't do that. Just switch over to this card. Much easier to cast. Now you can play it in like 3 and 4 color decks without really sweating it too much. Just strictly better. He said the thing. Strictly better Unexpected Windfall, which is already quite played. Sees a good bit of play here in the last year or so. So cool. But there's no tech. Just better. It's better than an already existing amazing Magic card. But here's the first rare or mythic of the day, and it's a mythic. Let's look at Bootleggers Stash here. This is 6 mana, 5 and a green for an artifact. Land you control have tap to create a treasure token. So it's a better Brass's Bounty in just about every way, right? It's not just a single use spell that puts a bunch of treasures into play. This, turn by turn, can put more and more treasures into play, and it costs less than Brass's Bounty, so it is very much fixed in that way. I'm going to bring up Dragon Spark Reactor for the second time in this video because I'm an idiot. I just like janky things. I really don't think this is going to be a great deck, but could be, if you make enough treasures to get this card out quickly enough, like on turn 4, for instance, and you untap with it on play on the next turn, you could probably, with a Goldspan Dragon, you can probably do some dumb stuff. So, buds, I'm not even saying this card is bad or anything. I just think I'm more excited about a lot of the applications for the other rares and mythics that we'll see today. But as like a janky, I can't wait to do stuff on stream as soon as I get the freaking internet back. The real internet. Still using the hotspot. I can't wait to play this card and do like dumb stuff with it. That's exactly what it is, just dumb stuff. If this card makes the the top 8 consistently of multiple events, then I'll be a little bit shocked. But I will say this text box is extremely powerful. It just takes a few turns to get it going, and cards that already cost a lot of mana and take a few turns to get going and probably don't do much the turn they come into play aren't usually good. Aren't usually very good. But again, you get a couple of turns to cook with this thing, and you are making a pretty delicious little ratatouille there. So we'll see. We'll see about it, but we doubt it. Let's move on to widespread thievery. Now, if you're going to make treasure tokens, I think this is the cooler way to do it. It's definitely the cheaper way to do it. But widespread thievery is just an enchantment that costs 2 and a red. And it's got Hideaway 5. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a treasure token. Then you may pay WUBRG. If you do, you may play the exiled card that you hid away without paying its mana cost. So the cool thing about this is just whenever you cast a multicolored spell, get a treasure token. That's dope. That's really cool. It's almost never, unless there are some multicolored spells that have hybrid mana cost for just 1 mana that you could ratchet off. And just, that would be fun. Just play 1 mana thing, get a treasure token, play 1 mana thing, get a treasure token, continue this process. But just the ability to play a 2 or 3 mana thing and get a treasure token a couple of times a turn is probably going to be good enough in like 4 and 5 mana decks. Obviously, this fixes your mana while also, letting you fire off the WUBRG ability on it sometimes too. So that's awesome. It's also really sweet that if you have like 2 of these in play, you're just making a ton of treasure tokens. There, you might be able to get parity on like, 2 mana multicolored spells. So I don't know. The ability to create treasures is actually pretty stacked. Like, it's always really, really good. But this is a 3 mana do nothing enchantment most of the time on curve. So I'm not saying it's a good card. There's a reason it's only like the second rare that we're looking at today. But at the same time, I get pretty pumped about cards like this, like unashamedly. I don't know that it's going anywhere in standard, but this ability is very, very strong. I should say that. But for all the ways that we usually evaluate cards, it doesn't look like a great Magic card, especially in standard. Maybe in Commander. Maybe you play this there. But we got a gang of expensive enchantments to start the rares and mythics today. Let's move on to Rabble Rousing next. This is 5 mana, 4 and a white for an enchantment with Hideaway 5. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, create that many 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Then if you control 10 or more creatures, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So sweet little card advantage on this, but that's not where it's at. Where it's at is getting a dude every time you attack. It's really sweet. It's not even a tapped and attacking dude, which I actually think would make this card less effective. This allows you to crack in and not really have to worry too much about the crack back. You just block with all your little chumpy dudes, and if you have anthem effects, they get better. If you just block with a guy or 2, maybe you leave a guy behind to, attack next turn. And then when you attack with those tokens the next turn, you get even more guys. So, I don't know. It's actually really sweet. It snowballs to great effect, but it does cost a bunch of mana to actually play. The good thing about this, as compared to the last couple of enchantments that we've looked at, is that if you play it on curve, it's going to do something the turn that you play it. But on turn 5, there's probably better ways of winning the game on the spot, and this doesn't even do that. Again, this just protects you from crackback, but there's probably better ways of spending a 5 mana slot in your mono white aggro deck. But I still think that this is very cool, and again, a very Commander level looking card. But that doesn't mean I don't like the card. I think that it's weak. In Commander, it looks extremely strong in a lot of ways. So knock yourselves out there. But this is another one we'll be playing on stream, I think. But because of the mana cost, it's probably priced out of most actual top tier standard play. But it still looks like a great card. I'm in love with a lot of the text boxes in this set, but not necessarily the mana costs. Let's check out Reservoir Kraken next. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for a 6/6 Kraken with Trample and Ward 2. At the beginning of each combat, if Kraken is untapped, any opponent may tap an untapped creature they control. If they do, tap Reservoir Kraken, and you create a 1/1 blue fish creature token with this creature can't be blocked. Really cool card here, man. This is another Kraken that probably is just a hair shy of standard play. We've seen a few of those lately. I miss you, Nadir Kraken. I loved you. Never got your shot. This probably won't necessarily either, but at least it's not vanilla. It's a 4 mana 6/6 with Trample, and it's difficult to deal with. Ward isn't hexproof, but Ward has proven to be a pretty good ability a fair amount of the time, so I think Ward is quite valuable on this card. And if it doesn't get to attack, then you at least get 1/1s, you get 1/1s to chump block, or if you get enough 1/1s, they actually start attacking for a good amount of damage. So I like this thing. I think there's probably better ways to spend 4 mana, especially in a deck that has islands. You probably just don't want to tap out on turn 4. But there is a mono blue mid-range deck that's kind of cooking up that is probably going to be bad no matter what, like always. But this is just another piece for that deck that I'm excited about playing. But me being excited about a card probably doesn't make it good, but when you see a 4 mana 6/6 Trample, you should probably take some note. If this swings against a deck with no creatures, it's going to do the damage, and that's probably worth noting. But up next, let's look at Horde Hauler. They printed so many cards lately, I feel like I have to use that voice for Horde Haulers. 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 5/5 vehicle with trample. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact they control, and it accrues for 3. So, Deb, what if they control a bunch of treasure tokens? Yeah, what if they do? You get a bunch of treasure tokens. They have like 3 or 4, but they can just like pop them before this does combat damage. So that probably won't happen. I guess the good news there is that you got to attack with a 5/5 trample, and they had to sacrifice all their treasure tokens. So not all is lost in that situation. Even the floor is pretty good. People seem to forget that a 4 mana 5/5 is a freaking good deal, man. Juzam Jin is one of the most famous Magic cards of all time. One of the most powerful creatures of the old days. And I know I sound like a boomer here, but a 4 mana 5/5 is still a pretty decent rate, especially when you throw trample and no real downside, and in fact an upside, onto the card. It's not bad. And crew 3 is fairly easy to hit too. I'm not sure that this slots in, finds a slot, is worth the opportunity cost, whatever phrase you want to slot in on the, the dev slot machine of terms here. But again, I'm not sure that it's worth like the slot in the deck, but it is a 4 mana 5/5 trample, and sometimes it will just, create a treasure token because they have an Asika's Chariot or something, and like it'll attack through the chariot too, which is kind of important. So there are things I like about this card, and I've kind of been, not gonna lie, looking for good red vehicles because there ain't a whole lot of them. So this might find a slot in certain decks, like a big red or something, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I do think it's a cool card though. But up next, let's look at Corpse Explosion, which is an image. It's 3 mana, 1 a black and a red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Corpse Explosion deals damage equal to the exiled card's power to each creature and each planeswalker. So I want to really like this thing, man. 3 mana sweeper kind of reminds me of Draconic Intervention, but Draconic Intervention hasn't really seen much play, has it? And I doubt this will too. This, the thing about Draconic Intervention is that you want to play sweepers in a control deck, and you also want to play instants and sorceries in a control deck, right? So you shouldn't have too much trouble finding a target to remove from your graveyard for DI. But this is a little bit different, right? This has to be in a deck that plays creatures, but also wants to sweep the board of creatures. And that is a bit of a taller order, slightly. 3 mana, pretty good if you can cast it on curve, but a lot of the time you're not going to be able to cast it for more than, 2-3 damage to everything. You might be able to mill something into your yard that's big and fat, possibly. But then you then you can't like reanimate that fat guy later. You have to exile it to cast this, and I don't like that either. I don't know. There are problems, foibles, few addendums here that I'd like to make, but at the same time, as a 3 mana sweeper, I can't sneeze at those too much. The card could end up seeing some play in just the right deck. But now on to the classic cards Dev likes but shouldn't likes portion of the video. Here's Zayator's Envoy here. 4 mana. This is 1 in Jund colors, a black, a red, and a green, for a 5/4 Vaishino Warrior with Trample. Whenever Envoy deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of your library. You may play a land from the top of your library or cast a spell with mana value less than or equal to the damage dealt from the top of your library without paying its mana cost. If you don't, put the card into your hand. It also blitzes for 2 in Jund colors. So if you want to blitz for a little bit extra, then sometimes you can get card advantage off of this, right? Draw the card at the end of turn when it sacrifices from the blitz ability, but also get card advantage off of it dealing excess damage, which is pretty sweet. Even if you don't get to play the card without paying its mana cost, you still put the card into your hand, and the rate on this is pretty good. A 4 mana 5/4 with Trample, and the Trample helps it deal excess combat damage and get you free cards. What don't I like about this? It's a 4 mana thing that doesn't really do much when it comes into play, and I know that, again, if you pull my arm, that is the phrase that will often appear on the slot machine, but there are a lot of good things in this format that cost 4 mana that Jund decks might want to choose to play that are probably better worth the slot in their deck than this, even though this looks very tempting and I want to give it a shot, right? Blitzing it into play doesn't look like a bad call at all, but, even a 5 mana, 5 power thing that sometimes draws you 2 cards I'm talking myself into it, but it's probably still not as good as a lot of the 4 and 5 mana options that you have in Standard. That said, the card is very versatile. It's good to draw off of the top after a sweeper or late in the game against a control deck because it's going to deal the damage if they don't have the removal spell in their hand, right? You probably blitz it into play in that situation. So they don't draw the removal spells. You take your 5 damage, you take your free couple of cards, right? So there are definitely places on the 4-point axes, where this looks pretty good. Where you're ahead, it looks okay. Where you're behind, it looks okay and all that. And the rate is not too bad. I just have a worry that the sort of Jund mid-range decks that want to play a card like this do probably have better options in these slots, but it's a card that I definitely want to try out. Another Jund card that I like but shouldn't from today is Agnes, the Dragon's Lash. I'm just going to call the card Agnes. Agnes, the Dragon's Lash. It bugs me that this card is not a dragon itself. This is 1 in a red and then a black-red hybrid and a green-red hybrid for a 3/3 Viashino Warrior with haste that is legendary. Whenever a creature you control with haste attacks, you create a tapped treasure token. Again, really like this thing. 4 mana, 3/3. Again, even though I really like it, just like the last card, I will spend a lot of this talking myself out of it. I mean, a 4 mana, 3/3 haste that basically always creates at least 1 treasure token, although it's tapped. Looks like a very good Magic card to me, but the rate is bad. Hill Giants are just not necessarily ever playable in Standard. Thundering Raiju sees some play here and there, but Raiju can, deal 4 damage the turn it comes into play, or it can make itself a little bit bigger the turn it comes into play. This doesn't necessarily do that, but as far as mid-range cards go, right, mid-range wants to deal damage reasonably fast with decently statted creatures. While also ramping sort of into its later game, its 5 and 6 mana plays, if it plays any. So this helps you bridge that gap pretty well, right? It's an aggressive creature that also creates treasure tokens, basically creates value no matter what, unless the opponent immediately has the removal spell. It's going to create some value for you, and if it does get killed, your opponent used a removal spell on a Hill Giant, you feel pretty good about that, right? You should, but really they used removal on your 4 mana play, which probably means they got mana value on you, which you don't like. So, it's hard to justify playing a Hill Giant. It really is. But when you give that Hill Giant haste and the ability to ramp you and fix your mana and all that, that's when I start getting really excited about this. So I like this card. Shouldn't, but look at that alternate art. Look at it, that's awesome. So, I don't know. There's so many things I like about the card, but again, I acknowledge that if I'm being objective here, I probably should not tell you the card is good, but card might be better than I objectively judge it as, and be just as good as I subjectively judge it as. So that'd be good news for me. But let's look next at a couple of Ascendancies to get into the top 3 cards in the video here. Capenna Ascendancy is first. This is Naya colors, a red, a green, and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put the card into your hand, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So awesome. Like, really, really sweet. It is, again, a 3 mana enchantment that doesn't do anything on curve the turn you play it. Those are often not very good in Constructed Magic. So I keep saying Constructed Magic, and Commander is a constructed format. So I should really be careful there. But I do think the card is quite playable in Commander, obviously, which I keep saying about certain cards. But even in Standard, and even with, all of the main deck enchantment hate going around, this might still be worth a slot in your deck because you get your own personal Howling Mine in a lot of ways, unless, you'll probably build your deck to where it's just creatures and planeswalkers. You might hit a land, but in the event you hit a land, it kind of blasts you through land pockets, which is kind of nice too. So nothing wrong with that. Just a sweet little card here. I will always take a one-sided Howling Mine. Basically, especially when it's really cheap, and this card is. At the same time, these decks want to play a bunch of creatures. They want to be somewhat aggressive, and pausing their entire game plan to play this on turn 3 might not necessarily be what they want to do. But again, I'm talking myself out of a very good text box, and at this point, it's not even a text box with a higher mana value than it should have. The mana value is right on this card too, so pretty strong looking Magic card here. But let's look next at Riveteers Ascendancy, and I like the joke on the art here, right? Like, they're on a girder. Ascendancy. Do you see what they're trying to do here? They've been getting clever lately over there at the Wizards office, but Riveteers Ascendancy is 3 mana, Jund colors, black, red, green for an enchantment. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may return target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, but you only get this once a turn because, you know, no fun allowed. I will say more than once a turn, you could probably do infinite combos with this somehow, but we already have stuff like this in the format, like Aura, the Cleric's 4-drop that kind of does this, you know. So it's not a broken card, but it is probably very, very good in these, you know, sort of theoretical at this point. Jund sacrifice decks that seem to be shaping up, mostly because of this set, but they already kind of existed, you know, the only cold Anvil decks. And even though these new decks that are Jund sacrifice, I don't know if they'll play Anvil or not. It does look like they have reason and option to. However, if you want to play this Ascendancy, you might not want to play Anvil because then you have, you know, 8 non-creature cards in your deck, in a deck that really cares about sacrificing creatures. You should probably play some creatures. So I just don't know that you have all the slots for a card like this and all the other stuff that you want, right? But you probably take out Oni Cold Anvil and just play creatures in this and ways to sack those creatures. But then again, right, that's the same problem is if I want to play Deadly Dispute in my deck, and also this card, well, again, that's 8 non-creatures in a deck that really wants to play, you know, 28 creatures or thereabouts, and you just don't have all those slots. So it's always an interesting deck-building puzzle to figure out how to include cards like this, and I think that it might be worth it to do that because it looks like the centerpiece to the Jund Sacrifice deck. Now, a couple of cards back, I mentioned that we were in the top 3, so if you're following along well enough here, you may notice that we are at the last card of the day here, and I'll do a quick reload of Mythic Spoiler before we get out of here, but there is a reason I saved this card for last. I'm not sure it's the absolute best card of the day, but I can almost guarantee to see some amount of standard play, especially if mid-range decks are the, you know, order of the day. Let's look at Workshop Warchief here. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 5/3 Rhino Warrior with Trample. When it ETBs, you gain 3 life, and when it dies, you create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token, and you can also blitz this in for 4 and 2 green in case you want to, like, draw cards. Whether it reminds you more of Thragtusk or Siege Rhino, I don't really care, and I'm not here to make that call for you, but it is a beautiful, it is a sweet little thing that I can't wait to play this one, guys. I really can't. Just in terms of, like, classic standard Magic value producer, hard to play around, difficult to deal with. Those are the same thing, but just the kind of card that makes your opponent pull their hair out. Sweepers don't deal with it the way you want sweepers to deal with it. It puts a 4, when it dies, it put a 4/4 into play. It's nuts. There's going to be turns where you blitz this into play, and it's basically like a 5-power haste thing that gains you 3 life and puts a 4/4 into play and draws a card. Like, God, the value. The absolute value on this thing, man. And 5 mana, if, you know, the past, if Thragtusk is anything to be believed. And I still think Thragtusk would be a good card if printed today. I guess we'll get to see, won't we? You know, this is a little harder to cast than Thragtusk, but I don't think that makes it a worse card, you know. It creates this huge dude when it dies. It has a whole ability Thragtusk didn't have that's really good against control decks. You know, again, the turn after the sweeper, blitz this in, take your 5, crack to the face. That seems pretty good. Draw the card when it dies, and you get a 4/4. And if you wanted 3 life, you get to have that too. So, God, just value. Just taking him down to the mayor of Value Town. This card is. And who knows, maybe we can relive the glory days and come in riding rhinos, repping that Abzan again. But honestly, it'll probably be Jund this time, if I had to guess. But that is all of the cards from today, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know. Let me know how you felt about all these down there in the comments section. Some of the rares were less bangy than usual today, but a lot more janky and fun to think about, and that's the kind of space I like to live in. I get excited about that, but we still got some rares that'll be very good in Standard, obviously. So just let me know how you felt. What's the best card of the day? All that stuff down there in the comments section. Like the video, share it around, and sub if you haven't done that yet for all the spoiler content, plus top 25, top 10 sleepers, deck techs, dank jank content when you want to see some of these. If you want to see some of these like janky decks I keep talking about, I'm going to play on stream. If you want to see those, sub to the channel because I'm sure there'll be dang janks eventually. Apart from that, check out twitch.tv/SBMTGDev if you want to see us play Magic as soon as I get the consarned internet back. It'll happen one of these days. And then you can also check out the Patreon if you want to support my content, make it a little bit better around here, vote on stuff, you know, once the season actually starts. Just $1 a month to do that. It's patreon.com/SBMTG. Link in the description. Also down there in the description, links to all the spoiler videos that we've done so far if you want to catch up. Or patch up. It's a good card from today. Brought it around. But anyway, just do all the things. YouTube stuff, Twitch, and Patreon, blah, blah, blah. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Blaze. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.